Hey, it's Jonathan back with yet another video sponsored by Hero Forge, but this one's gonna be a little bit different. So if you're anything like me, when you first heard about the Hero Forge 2.0 and the color minis, full printed color minis, you were like, how are you doing this? What sorcery is this that you're just gonna take this thing that I make on your website and print out like a fully manufactured color plastic toy for me? Because here's the thing, I'm the kind of nerd that I want to know how things work. And I've really had a lot of questions about how Hero Forge works since the beginning, even before color. And I wanted answers. So since they sponsored so many videos here on our channel, I reached out and was like, hey, can I talk to somebody who can tell me how all this stuff works? And they were like, sure, talk to the COO, Joshua Bennett. Okay, let's do that. But before we jump into the interview, Hero Forge also wants you to know that they're having an extended Black Friday sale, November 19th, which is already now, since this video is coming out after that, through November 30th. You can get $5 off any physical printed mini using the code EPICLOOT at checkout. And also, you can get STLs for only $3.99, which is like half price. And also, I want to let you know that if you've missed the window to buy your minis and have them printed and shipped to you in time for the holidays, but you still really want to give a custom mini as a gift, there's a couple ways you can go. One, you can buy Hero Forge gift cards for your friends and loved ones. And two, you can buy the STL and go to an independent printing service and have them print it and ship it to you. There's lots of websites where people do stuff for money, and there's lots of people that list on those websites that they will print off your minis and ship them to you. I'm not going to name any of those websites specifically because they're not sponsoring this video. But as you will see in the interview, the COO of Hero Forge is totally cool with people doing this. Obviously, you can't sell the minis once they're printed, and you can't like distribute the files after you buy them. But if you buy a file and you want to pay someone to print it off and send you the mini, that's totally cool. Also, if you've been thinking about getting into 3D printing yourself and you want to see the easy, lazy way to set up and print your Hero Forge STL files, check out my video here. So let's hop into the interview and see what else Joshua had to say about all of my crazy questions, about specifics of how this whole wild operation works. First of all, thanks. Thanks for taking the time, man.
Oh,
this
yeah.
is awesome.
I'm excited to do this.
It's been real cool to get the support from Hero Forge to kind of keep going.
No, it's our pleasure. We've been really putting in effort to find sponsorship opportunities, that fall outside of just like the really huge shows out there. It feels good to support the hobby as a whole by supporting, people working in it in all different sizes and all different places.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's made it possible for us to do all kinds of upgrades, like the software we're using right now. We bought this from the first sponsorship we got with you guys. So yeah, that's
fantastic.
It's been real cool. I mean, you guys are doing a lot of stuff all the time. Like when we were
You're telling me.
Making that big review video, we had to reshoot a bunch of parts. Eventually we just had to call it done because between shooting and editing, a whole bunch of new stuff had come out. So some of the things that we mentioned, like, oh yeah, but there'll be more XL wings coming soon. And then the next day it's like, here's 12 new sets of XL wings.
Yeah, man, we're sprinting all the time as fast as we can. There's no end of stuff that people want us to add. So that's inspiring. It's like there's always a list as long as your arm of things people want right now. So it's kind of cool to keep up as well as we can with that.
I think that's one of the interesting things about the tabletop space is because it's so much generated by the people who play the games, and like there's always room to homebrew stuff and to come up with new things. So if you would have asked 40 years ago if people would be playing Mouse Folk in their tabletop RPGs, we've been like, that's ridiculous. No, you've got like 7 races, and that's how, So the fact that you guys are able to offer as much variety as you can,
thank you.
It kind of blows me away.
Yeah, we didn't start there. I mean, I know when we first launched like 6 years ago, like our beta, we didn't have even a quarter of, I think, the races we have up there now, let alone assets like armor and stuff. And that's been a big focus, especially over the last like year and a half. And we're still not there yet, and there's new stuff coming out all the time, but we've made a lot of progress.
Yeah. It could be nearly impossible to try to keep up with everything that people
across
want.
all the systems.
I don't know how you would manage that. I guess in terms of that too, in terms of the modeling. So as I understand it, there's the base sort of skeleton that works for some setups, maybe some, base like humanoid races, but when you get into stuff like when the bear folk came out and you started adding the furry legs and the furry arms, and you can see, it's one of the things we talked about in the review video, like you can see when you add close to it, all of that has to lay down flat. And I think you guys were talking about that in one of your streams when we were getting closer to 2.0 launching, about how much work had to go into that. Is it often the case where to add some of these new items or parts or features, like you have to completely redesign things? Or is there a kind of a base form you work from and it's just a matter of tweaking?
It really depends on the feature. I think generally speaking, the further ahead you look when you're setting up systems, the easier things will be. Yeah. And there's a lot of cases where we hadn't planned ahead and we built in certain sets of assumptions in how the rig works or how the character works. And then, you get to high heels and it's like, oh, we didn't account for that. How do we retroactively go back and fit that into the hierarchy of how poses work, for instance? It certainly can be a lot of revisiting old assumptions and revisiting base level planning that needs to be improved upon, needs to be checked in with in order to kind of open the doors for all those neat new additions. And that's all often, well, maybe not often, but that's a regular thing that we check in about, going back and looking at our foundations to make sure we can fit as much versatility and flexibility as we want to.
Do you run into situations often where you're like, oh, we've got to redo the whole base of how the system works now because that's the only way we're going to be able to make this next jump?
Not really. We've never had to scrap everything and start fresh. You do surgery on individual parts and you win that flexibility back where it wasn't built in. And that's not always an easy process, but it's very rarely throw it all out and start again. We have a lot of practiced hands when it comes to the art content and the technical character direction. This isn't their first rodeo, so we benefit from their wisdom and their long experience of building these sorts of systems. And I think that just by merit of them having a very professional approach, they've solved these kinds of problems before, so it's a little bit easier down the line.
How many artists do you currently employ full time to build these models and these parts? Because it comes out so fast.
Well, our art team has been growing over time, like most of our teams. The more popular we get, the more we're hustling to put out as much as we can and the more help we need. But our art team especially is interesting because it's always been a balance between people working in-house who are very familiar with our systems, help build them, and understand a lot of the subtlety that's required to make artwork in this very modular system, and a lot of out-of-house freelancers. So we regularly go hunting for good talent. And, given the circumstances right now, we're all working remotely anyway, so we're set up to do it. So I don't know. It varies what that ratio is month to month, even depending on, if we really need a lot of extra muscle, we might bring on more freelance talent to do more of these base sculpts. While when we have features that are deeply tied to complex systems, that might be something that we try and focus, more on doing in-house. Things like how the decal systems are set up. That's something that requires a lot of firsthand knowledge of our systems to do well. So, at any given time, we'll have, 4 or 5 people working in-house, and then, upwards of, a dozen people that we're working with out of house sometimes, depending on what kind of deadlines we're looking to meet.
That makes sense. Because as the needs vary.
Definitely. Different bits of content require different expertise. Decals aren't typically handled by, 3D modelers. We'll just need different expertise. So the ability to kind of tailor our workforce with, pulling in talented experts that are willing to do freelance work for us has been just hugely helpful in keeping us flexible. Because, anyone knows what, the next month of content will be. It varies so much from month to month.
So it's interesting how everything still manages to fit together so well and be so interchangeable.
That's the challenge, right? They all need to. Every helmet needs to work, from a bug head to a bear to whatever you're doing.
That was a question I had too. Would you get the situations if you go from a human head to a frog head? That's a very different shape. Does it have? Does it take a completely different model?
Even that is kind of a complicated answer. Sometimes you'll find that it does. There are situations like we added the raven head with the really elongated beak, and for that, a lot of the closed-faced helmets, they didn't look good. And more than that, when you tried to deform them through a stretch squash rig situation. They just wouldn't keep the same aesthetic when you were like bursting them out way far in front of the face to fit a beak. So in that case, we went back and we developed some new open face version of helmets, like helmets where the face was, flipped open. So it really depends on the scenario. There are definitely a lot of them, like fitting onto a bear head, where you can really effectively just scale the dimensions of a helmet just so and have it look appropriate and natural and still keep the same kind of artistic notes the sculptor originally intended. But it doesn't always work. And in those cases, you need to develop new fallback plans.
Or I've hit the limitations where it's just like, you can't put shoes on these feet because they're like the canine, the way the joints are set.
Digitigrade legs. Yeah.
That's the word. I don't know anything about animal anatomy.
I didn't know before we added them to the site. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. But I guess in terms of like the user base, do you find that more people tend to order the minis and have them printed and shipped, or do the downloads? Like has there been a shift in that?
Yeah, most of our customers are definitely interested in the physical prints. I think 3D printing has gotten huge, and there's a ton of people doing it, and we see evidence of that. But it's still a niche. It's a different hobby than tabletop gaming, right? If you do both of those hobbies, and you can get them and print them yourself. But I think most tabletop gamers don't own 3D printers, and perhaps most 3D printers aren't necessarily tabletop gamers. But there is a notable overlap, and we have seen a steadily increasing interest in people wanting to pick up those digital files or find other ways to print at home economically. And that's definitely spiked since a lot of us are spending a lot more time at home these days. Like you, people are looking into new hobbies, picking up 3D printers for home, and yeah, we've definitely seen a spike for sure, which is wildly exciting. Like, I love that we sell those digital models. There's also something nice to if you order a physical print, we create those things on demand from your specifications, so it can take 2 or 3 weeks for it to get to you. But if you purchase that digital model, it's in your inbox in 15-20 minutes.
Yeah, so
and you can load it into your printer right away. But I'd say it's increasing in popularity for sure.
I would guess that the rise in affordable resin printers makes a big difference, because like I've seen people that print them off, and unless you have a really high end, I guess I wouldn't even say that, because I've seen some people, like with the newer what's the Ender, the Ender 3. Yeah. Seems to get pretty good results, but it's not quite the same. It's not quite the same as that sort of smooth, just precision you can get with a resin printer. I would guess that because of this need to be able to, because you guys work with Shapeways, right? I don't know if you work with other vendors as well for the printing. Is it pretty much just Shapeways?
Pretty much just Shapeways, yeah. We work with a number of machines through them, through other supplemental vendors. The color printing, for instance, we looked long and hard. We scouted for people who were doing color with these like brand new machines. The Mamaki, the machine we're using now, it just came out, and not a lot of people have a lot of experience with it, and not a lot of people are running them with the capacity that we kind of need.
Yeah.
Given how many figures we produce on a day-to-day basis. So we kind of worked with our manufacturing partner to like scout like who's doing this and how do we kind of fold them into this production pipeline. But yeah, so we facilitate those orders through Shapeways and kind of work with them, which includes out-of-house people who are working with this new technology that we want to get access to.
Does Shapeways have some kind of, like, do they put any of the limitations on you for making sure that things can be printed? Because, for example, in the Hero Forge Creators Guild Facebook group, one of the things everyone loves to share is when they find a glitch. And I'll say I myself, too, have several of those glitches saved for various things.
For creative purposes. Yeah.
I've never attempted to purchase one of the STLs, but when people try to purchase those glitch things, will the system automatically flag that and reject it, or is that some sort of manual review where somebody's like, we can't print this?
There are some automated systems that kind of go through a number of checks. You would certainly be able to check out, but we would probably follow up after the fact if you have something that's wildly unprintable. Like, hey, sorry, bad news. But yeah, there's a number of automated checks. Things like, is this model more than one separate shell? Because they're all supposed to be one solid piece. So that's an easy type of check that we can do. And then there's other checks like if you can twist something or put it at such an angle that it shrinks down to where it's too thin to successfully print. That's something that we sometimes find out when we're trying to print the model, and then we have to go back to the user and be like, hey, we'll need to address this somehow in order to make it printable.
Okay, because I would guess that's why there's a limit on because you can pose anything from the waist up, but from the waist down, it's fixed to the limited number number of poses, and I'm guessing that's just to make sure things stay attached and aren't going to fall over and stuff.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's, you need to make sure that both of those feet are really firmly planted and connect with that base in such a way that it won't, snap off, or something like that, or just, make sure it's sturdy enough for actual tabletop play. We've put a lot of time and a lot of effort into making sure we're familiar with the best practices for the materials that we use. We've printed off, things of tubes of varying thicknesses and manually bent them and broke them, and just had a lot of practice from seeing, thousands and thousands of minis go through. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's definitely a set of expertise that takes time to build up and varies from material to material as well.
So what are your feelings as the COO of Hero Forge about people who are doing their home printing, kind of digital kit bashing, and making modifications to the models after the fact?
I think that's great. I think, that's the same kind of kit bashing is obviously, originally done with physical models. And if it's even easier to do it with a digital model before you print it off, that's all the better. I've seen people do some pretty wild stuff. And there's even simpler reasons. Some people prefer to slice the model in such a way that they print the base and the model separately and then reattach them later. It's easier to paint under the model that way. And I think that's just great. I think that speaks to how versatile and how useful the digital products are, especially for people who have printers.
We had Joe. Are you familiar with Joe Cat? He animates the crap guy. We had him for one of a series that you guys sponsored. Yeah, Hero Factory.
Yeah, I think I saw it. He kit bashed on the long neck.
Yes, I found head, right? I found somebody had made a Wiggler bobblehead, and so I put that together. But then I was like, we probably shouldn't push this because I think the Wiggler helm is a Capcom copyright thing anyways, and let's not make a video about that. But I guess on to sort of the meat of what we're talking about today, and the color tech. And you mentioned the Mamaki, the Mamaki, the 3D UJ553?
3D UJ553. I pulled it up in a window next to you. Yeah, so I was sure to get it right. Make sure 3D UJ553.
So if I understand how this works, it's basically like an inkjet printer that uses UV resin and inks at the same time, and then pretty much cures each voxel as it places it through. Is that about right?
That is pretty close. So there's a couple other really interesting things going on in that print tech. One of them is that they have a separate print head for support material. Mm-hmm. And that's really interesting and exciting for a number of reasons.
Yes.
So you said you have the Anycubic photon?
Yes,
is that right?
I have the photon, and I have noticed and tried to point out in videos too that as opposed, because I've ordered the physical minis like the premium plastic from you guys, and like any printing, you get a couple, still little support nubs that might take a little carving or sanding. None of that on the color minis. They're absolutely clean.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to say, if you've printed a mini, if you had to guess, how long do you spend in the process of removing those sprues and snipping them off and sanding the nubbins to make sure it looks good?
Well, I actually, a couple minutes because I have the techniques that I use that you can see in my video or here tutorial. When I'm doing one that I'm going to be taking real close-up pictures of, I'd say I probably spend a good 10-15 minutes at least getting it all right.
And you can imagine how much that scales up. If you're doing 100 minis at once, that's a meaningful percentage of the actual labor that goes into producing these figures. So you see a lot of 3D printers, especially ones that are trying to set themselves up as not a consumer level printer, but a production printer. They use these dissolvable support materials. And there are pros and cons to that. I think if you go way back when we first launched Hero Forge back in 2016, our first high detail material, it was a acrylic resin off of a Projet, I think 3D Systems machine. Okay. And that material used a dissolvable support method as well. It wasn't water soluble. You had to simmer it in really hot oil to get it to come off. It was more like wax. All right. And that has its own set of things you want to watch out for. When you have dissolvable support material, every surface on the outside of the model is touching that support material. So you can sometimes find that'll introduce some texture, for instance. So when it comes to, trimming off sprues and supports and having, little nubbins of contact there, first, having a slight texture related to that coverage on the outside of the model. Different printers have different perks, upsides and downsides. For the Mamaki machine, not only do they have this, dissolvable support material that is much more friendly for larger scale production of these things, it also has a much, much bigger print bed. The print bed on this thing, I believe, is 20 inches by 20 inches. While, if you look at your Anycubic, it's probably like 10 inches by 10 inches, maybe less.
Oh yeah, not 8. Even that. It's like, I could look it up, but I think it's like 6 by 3 or something.
Yeah, and that's fine. But if you're doing a ton of minis, having that big print bed and being able to do one big run of a ton of them is huge. So in a lot of ways, the machine is a lot more production friendly. It's built a lot more for uses like what we're doing than it is like home printing or things like that. So that's one of the nice benefits of it. So you can take upwards of 150 figures all at once, all laid down in the build tray, and then you can dissolve that support material off. And that's, as you can imagine, is a lot smoother a process than manually trimming off, tiny little toothpick size contact points on the figure, which also produces great results. One of the great things about figures done with SLA tech and support sprues is that the surfaces that don't touch those support sprues tend to be really smooth. Like they can be almost like glass level smooth, which if you're painting, that smoothness is really important. While perhaps for, a figure that's already colored and you might just be slapping like a ink wash on there, that texture doesn't really figure in at all to your experience of it. So there's a lot of reasons to be excited about that. But everything else you said is dead on. So it uses UV cured acrylic inks that it mixes in various measures. You also mentioned the idea of individual voxels, which I'm not sure how tech savvy most of your listeners are, but voxels are kind of like 3D space pixels. So you can imagine a model built with thousands of little individual color points through it. And some of the new 3D print tech and some of the new 3D print file formats do use a voxel format where you can kind of control things all the way through. You can imagine for like a hypothetical printer that's printing in clear materials, you'd want to be able to like have a clear orb with like a fire floating in the middle or something like that. Those kind of shells within shells is something you can do with the voxel format. Most of the models are built, traditionally like a video game through polygons and a texture that wraps around them. So for our models, it does also work that way. It's a color layer that wraps around the model. And I don't recommend breaking your minis, but if you were to snap one of your minis open, you'd see that it has a solid white core and then a color layer that wraps around that white core. And those are all different, UV inkjet inks that this printer is kind of layering into that support material layer at a time.
But you mentioned doing like an ink wash. Do you recommend doing any sort of finishing to make them pop, the color minis, after you get them, doing an ink wash or a clear coat or anything like that?
Typically, I'd say no, but I have seen a lot of people experimenting with ink washes specifically. They want to get, a little bit higher contrast, make the figures pop. And I haven't tried it much myself. They get printed and then they have a sealant that gets put onto it. Okay. So as you might imagine, if a UV resin or an ink or a material is cured with UV light, then it's susceptible to, what you see when you leave like a piece of paper in the sun, like hung up on a classroom wall for years, like it lightens and it loses that color. So we do coat them in a semi-matte sealant that keeps it from further curing and keeps it from changing color after that. That sealant is not designed to be used on or as a primer, which is the only reason I hesitate to recommend doing ink washes on top of it. From what I've heard, a lot of users have successfully kind of experimented with that and liked the results.
Well, then the question, of course, is how is that going to hold up over time? That top coat of ink wash or whatever, is that going to cause its own dulling or weakening over time? I don't know.
Well, the actual sealant that you would be putting it onto, that sealant is waterproof, for instance. So if something changes over time, it would be because the ink layer was sitting on top. But I'm just kind of talking beyond my experience here a little bit because I haven't done a whole lot of ink washes on them.
I'm sure folks in the Creators Guild will keep us posted on the results of that stuff.
I'm sure.
That seems to be where all the weird stuff happens. If I understand as well, too, like when I'm modeling in the website, it's kind of a different version of what the file that ultimately gets put out, like when I download the STL. That's why there's a processing time of like 15 minutes or whatever between when I order and when I can actually download. I can't download it immediately. Is that a thing where I'm basically creating like the map and then there's a whole different set of assets that need to be put together to give me the file I can print, or is what I'm seeing there essentially building the end model?
There definitely is a processing step that we put the meshes through. So for instance, if you look at the STL and you were to like zoom into the inside of that model, it isn't like a hair model sitting, intersecting with a head model, intersecting with, a shirt model or whatever. Part of that processing, in order to prepare it to be most compatible with as many 3D printers as we can, those models get kind of seamed up and welded together and result in like one solid shell, which is much more desirable for almost all 3D printers. So we have our own kind of secret sauce, system that we run our models through to make sure that they print as well as they can. And, that can vary, even from material to material.
So how does that differ with the color? Because that seems like a whole different... I don't know anything about the file formats or anything like that for the color printers, but I'm guessing that that's like a whole nother layer of application that has to go on to get that file into a printable format.
Yeah. I, without going into super specifics, you're right that the goal is to hand the printer a model that it can work with as effectively as possible, with as few repairs as possible. And what those printers expect is a 3D model file with a texture image that's wrapped around it. So yeah, there are a number of steps involved to get there for sure.
I mean, the printer came out from Mimaki in 2017, which is still not that long ago, considered the turnaround between here's the technology to make 10 million unique colors, and then within a couple of years you're like, yeah, we're gonna do that for tabletop minis, because that seems like the best application of this breakthrough technology.
Right. Yeah.
But to do that,
well, I mean, it's definitely the case that we've been waiting for color. Like it isn't
okay.
Like the machine arrived and we're like, oh, okay, maybe we'll do color now. I think we've been thinking about color as like the next step way back since when we launched. Like
really?
We knew that 3D printers would get there. So we were really just waiting for like the first really good sample prints that were really promising. And as soon as we saw those, we were like, okay, go, got to get color. And the funny thing is the printers that first prompted us to start working on it are not the ones we went with. We had explored a couple other printer models before we ended up landing on the Mimaki.
Okay, so yeah, that was going to be another one of my questions is like, did you ever think you would be able to do this when you first launched Hero Forge? But apparently, yes, totally, it was in the plan.
We did, or we hoped, I think.
Yeah, that it would come eventually.
You can hopefully someday we'll print little tiny living people that can run around on the tabletop. I'm sure the technology will arrive, but it's just not here yet. So we're looking forward to the future.
I don't want this to turn into a philosophy video, but if they're living, should you? No. So I guess, yeah, it seems though like I haven't seen, and maybe it's just because the color tools haven't been really widely adopted yet, or not the color, but like the color printing hasn't been that widely adopted. It's one of those things where it's like, oh, we can do this. Okay, now what do we do with it? Like Mimaki, their suggested use cases signage, and it's like, come on, dude.
Yeah, door signs.
You can do better than that. Like signs aren't that hard to make. But you had to develop quite a bit of proprietary tech to be able to get it from me screwing around in my browser to something that they can print over at Shapeways on this machine, right?
Yeah, certainly. That's an interesting thing about 3D printing. It's a technology with so much promise. We've seen so little adoption of it in terms of like consumer products, like stuff you can go buy in stores. I can think of like a couple here and there. Like I know there was one of the big headphone companies a while back was selling headphones with personalized like ear cup art or something like that. And then, I think for a while there was 3D printed custom shoes, I think someone was offering, but just like weird applications that you wouldn't necessarily think of. That's the conundrum of 3D printing. It really blossoms when you get to a place like what we're doing where meaningful customization, like the thing coming out the other side of the printer, is not something you could have done otherwise. And there just haven't been many products like that. I think a lot of what we still see it used for is rather than like customers buying things in shops, it's been more like printed titanium aerospace parts. That's where you're really seeing like the big companies find a place for 3D printing. And it's to like save machining costs on prototyping and things like that. I'd be interested to know if you've seen other people doing stuff like we're doing, like stuff that really uses 3D printing and delivers on the promise of 3D printing, but in a way that benefits just someone who wants to buy something in a shop.
Yeah, no, I haven't. That's the thing is I've seen it utilized a lot, since the breadth of materials that can be used has changed. I've seen it be more adopted by manufacturing, either for functional parts or more durable prototyping. But the biggest thing I've seen it seems to really come in handy for is like medical and dentistry applications, where things need to be custom made to a person's body. The Open Limb Project, there's a sort of like an open source project for making prosthetics. Yeah, stuff like that. Yeah. It seems to be a total game changer. But yeah, finding these more consumer level applications, which, like, let's be honest, these wider applications are sort of what motivates people to develop the technology more. You know, when you can make things that you can sell to people rather than these real specific needs that you might be able to, you know, charge a lot more for. So yeah, I haven't seen a lot of it, and I'm interested.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because at the same time, like, in a sense, it's 3D printing companies like Mamaki. They're building tools to do things with. Like, they don't necessarily need to know that we're gonna, you know, we're in love with tabletop games, so we're gonna be like, we're gonna take this and make minis with it. You know, they didn't know that going in, and they couldn't possibly have known that. But, you know, they built the best tool for the job, so that's pretty neat.
So the first guy that we had to order in color was one of our characters, one of our warlocks from our show, Too Many Warlocks, who is a very colorful individual. This guy's from a very early batch. We ordered pretty much like as soon as it was possible. But the first thing I think that a lot of people noticed was the metal effect, especially in some of these earlier batches. It was, I mean, I don't know how you can be disappointed when you can, like, design basically a manufactured toy in full color and have it printed and sent to you. But there seemed to be some some disappointment in sort of how some of the metal came out early on.
Yeah.
Like the gold is a little greenish, and some of the silver just come out as white. And if you compare that to, you know, some of the more recent ones, it's like night and day. So I'm really curious in terms of developing the material effects and stuff. Is this just a matter of rendering, or is there something else that had to go on to get from the first stages to, you know, where it was at when you guys were finally ready to release it to the public?
Yeah, there's a ton of refinement. So over the course of that beta, I think we ran the color beta for about 6 months. And right at the beginning, we definitely got some of that feedback. The metals thing you mentioned as well, that's a good example. And there's been a ton of work that's gone into improving the print tech, both from the rendering side, like when we generate that texture, how things look. That would be something like the metal, for instance, like figuring out how to render that shine in such a way that it looks convincing and, you know, not too washed out or what have you. That's definitely something that we've been improving and tweaking as we go. At the same time, there's also a lot of physical updates to the print process and the tuning of the printer that goes into that as well. So I can give you a few examples of things that we've kind of developed over time. Back when we first launched the Kickstarter, the demo models that we produced for that, they had a different coating.
Okay.
So the coating we use now, I think I mentioned, it's like a semi-gloss, semi-matte varnish that's on there, and it's thin as we could get it. Back then, the first coating we were using was actually much, much thicker, and it had almost the consistency of wax. It laid on really thick. And that was one of the first things. Like, we finished the Kickstarter and we're like, that could be improved. I know for sure that could be improved. So we got rid of the waxy coating and we just tried on lots and lots of additional options until we found one that brought all the same benefits, but addressed some of those issues. So again, that UV, you know, the coating is necessarily to UV seal it so it won't further change color after the fact. It's also sort of like when you soak like a piece of cloth in water and it gets darker, there's also an effect like that. When that varnish kind of sinks into the model, it can make colors a little bit darker, a little bit more vibrant. So that was just a long process of improving and seeing exactly how far we could push it. And then similar things happen too with the rendering. Metal especially is one that we really wanted to address. And if you check out the models we're shipping now, they have a much stronger, more vivid kind of metal shine effect.
Yeah.
Which itself had to be balanced. You know, you look at models and like the direction of shadow and light. An interesting thing about having that like baked on lighting where you have like a light source that's kind of reflected on the model, depending on how you do that, if it's in a room with its own, you know, natural lighting that's going in a different direction, those like conflicting shadow images get processed a little bit differently in your brain. You'll notice like when people do hand painting of minis with like object source lighting, like a glowing torch, those things almost always look best when they're not externally lit from another angle. It kind of lets you kind of fall into that illusion of the direction the light's coming from a little bit better. So we also did a ton of different attempts and different, you know, degrees of how to render that metal shine to make it look as nice as possible. And, you know, keep in mind as many of those little gotchas as you can. And now we're really pleased with how it looks. But, you know, that's the process of doing a beta for 6 months. You do the best you can and improve it in every single way until you've kind of exhausted every opportunity.
So like this guy who has the glass bottles at his feet that I swear look like there's light coming through them. The glass effect has come so far. That's not transparent in the middle, right? This is opaque. Or is there transparency coming into any part of these?
Well, the color layer itself, the color materials are slightly transparent. Okay. So if you sort of imagine, you have the model in front of you, the light comes in, it passes through the slightly translucent color layer, hits that solid white opaque core, and then bounces back out into your eyeball, right? On some parts, like a really thin, like bottleneck, it might be so thin that the color layer fills the entire entire piece of geo.
Okay, that's interesting. Now this guy I actually have 2 of these because you guys sent me one that was from an earlier batch, and then the same guy from a much later batch. Not just the contrast and stuff, but also the layer lines are more subtle in this one. Is that something that just varies from model? Because I've noticed it does vary a little bit from model to model. Is that something that has also been fine-tuned with the machines? Is there something with the settings, or is it just that this one came out a little smoother?
That is not something we've been tuning. What you might be able to perceive is the difference in coating as well. One of the benefits of the coating is that it goes on, flat. Okay. So if you have some micron, thick differences in ridges, it can kind of lessen the perception of those ridges by smoothing it out because it has like the shell over it. And that's something that we very intentionally experimented with. We were like, we want the coating to be thick enough that it does that and kind of, makes it look as flattering as it can without being too thick or without being too thin. That basically just took a lot of trial and error. But that's true of almost all our materials. I mean, if you think about over the last 6 years that we've been producing custom minis and shipping them, I don't think we're offering a single one of the materials that we originally launched with. In the same way that we're kind of always sprinting as fast as we can to put out as much content as we can and kind of meet the requests that users are making all the time. We're also always sprinting on the physical components of this too. We're always looking for the latest and greatest in printing technology and kind of dreaming about what the next big printer is going to be able to do. We're always refining in any way we can. We're just so passionate about this. We want to make the best minis we can for people.
So what about the bronze ones? I haven't seen one of those in person. I've seen there's only like a couple videos out there of those.
Sure.
And they vary in how good the camera work is on those. But they look pretty detailed. And from what I know of people who 3D print for casting, it's just there's certain materials you can use, and then you do like a plaster replacement cast, and then somebody goes in and hand polishes those, right?
That's right. Yeah. So the base 3D model we print using a ProJet 3D systems machine in a castable. It's like a wax-like material, and we do exactly what you described. There's a lost wax cast method. Pour molten bronze, pull that out, and then there's a combination of like machine tumble polishing, and then when necessary, like hand polishing as well. They are very, very detailed. The actual printed kind of wax model that we use is 32 micron layer thickness. So it's about as detailed as we get. Given the hand polishing process as well, you don't really see any layer lines at all, and it ends up polished smooth, and they look great. They're really super cool. Yeah, they're one of my favorites. Yeah.
Maybe at some point we'll get one of those. But the other thing I noticed was with it, and I'm guessing this just has to do with like quarantine situations and stuff. The option to have your model professionally painted was kind of there, and then it kind of went away. What's the status on that? And are you seeing a lot of interest in that, or are most people just cool with the printed ones?
Yeah, so we are still doing the hand painted models. I don't think we've removed that, but it is limited to only Kickstarter backers who explicitly pledged for a hand painted model. It was mostly a capacity concern. We set up with a really fantastic painting company called Den of Imagination. They actually do, in almost all cases, if you see like a promo image on our site of like, we release new content and here's 5 minis holding the new swords and whatnot, those minis were painted by Den of Imagination. They we use them, and they're stellar. But they're also, hand painting is a very labor intensive, slow process, and they have a limited number of painters. So we ended up launching that as something that was just available to people who backed for that very specific goal. We'll never say never that it won't roll out, to other people, but so far there hasn't been a big demand for it. But we're also still kind of working our way through all the people who pledged for that. I would say probably not even half of them have been redeemed yet. We're getting a lot of people who are saying like they're waiting for particular stretch goals that are on the way, which makes a ton of sense.
Does that ever come back to to kind of bite you that people just delay purchasing? Because it's always you order something and then you're like, well, it would be perfect if it had this one other thing. And there's this fear that next week they're going to drop that one other thing.
Yeah, that's if there is a Hero Forge curse, that is it. But I mean, even I'm susceptible to that. I'll just show you. I have this little mini here. This is a Goblin Paladin. His name is Broke-Tooth Flamebrand, and he's got this kind of like orange sword. But in the actual plot, his sword is on fire. But I got this guy made before we had the fire effects, so I'm also susceptible to that same thing. So at some point, I just need to go in and redo him myself. But I think that's kind of nice. When we release big new batches of content, and I see people on Twitter who are like, "That's perfect. That's what I've been waiting for. I'm going to go back in, and the character that I've already made that was waiting for that, I'm going to update all those characters." And I think that's super cool. Like, how often do you get to have something fresh and exciting on a week-to-week basis that might make your character even better?
Actually, no, you already addressed that. I was just say that the hand painting thing. I would imagine that's just like there's a quality control concern there too, because as easy as it would be to hire a bunch of freelance painters and send them stuff to paint, like everything that's going out, that's representing you guys. So if somebody sends out a garbage mini, you've got to deal with that customer service issue.
I suppose that's true, but also I think it's great that there's still a ton of people out there, like really talented painters who do commissions. And mostly when people reach out to us and ask about like hand painted figures, we have a Facebook page where we have featured painter of the month posts periodically, and we always steer people through that so they can like look through galleries of painted Hero Forge figures and link back to the artists who are doing them. We love that there's still an opportunity for like independent hobbyists doing that, or even people who offer print services at home. You go on Etsy, there's dozens of people who are like, buy, Hero Forge STL, bring it to me, I'll print it for you. And I think that's great. I think that, the more thriving and the more people are involved with tabletop gaming, either as a business or as a hobby, the better off we all are for it.
Are there any plans to do sort of like a print at home subscription model where somebody can just get unlimited STLs, or would that overload your systems?
I can say that that's something that is very, very interesting to us. We get a lot of people who ask us about whether it's unlimited or not. They just want like a more economical way of doing a lot more minis all the time. We are actively researching it, and the most useful thing people could do would be to send feedback to us for what they want to see in a subscription service that would kind of feed that need for STLs. But I can tell you that's definitely high on our list of things to do, just because of how often we hear it.
Do you think that's something unique to sort of the tabletop gaming space? Because in a lot of industries, people would be like, well, no, I don't want to create this system that could be potential for abuse and is going to cut down into the people ordering. Because realistically, like anyone who's gotten into mini painting will know that as much money as you can spend on it is how much you're going to spend on it, regardless of...
Or it's like with dice, right? Like people, they're never like, okay, I have enough dice now, I'll never buy dice again.
Yeah.
It's a hobby. It's not, you're not filling a need, you're feeding a joy. So keep going, keep painting minis, keep making them.
What do you see as kind of the next big steps for Hero Forge, either that you can do now or that you're waiting for kind of the printing tech to catch up? Like there's what were there were 2 stretch goals you didn't get to with the Kickstarter.
Right.
But I mean, knowing you guys, I'm assuming those are things you're gonna do eventually after you fulfill the rest of the goals.
So I'd say in the short-term answer to that question is definitely the stretch goals. So we could not have anticipated how much attention our Kickstarter got. It was wild. It was a marvel to behold, and we just kept like laying track for more and more stretch goals. And we had this list of like, these are the hypothetical stretch goals, and let's fill this list out to as high an amount as we can possibly imagine, pacing all the way through. And even then we were like, we were blown away. We couldn't have anticipated how many we unlocked. So a lot of the stretch goal content you see listed there is stuff that we have wanted to do for a really long time, but for one reason or another, we didn't have the dev bandwidth for it, or we needed that Kickstarter support to pursue those things. So there's still a ton of that. I think there's well over a dozen, maybe like 20 or something stretch goals still to come.
Before we get the objects?
A lot of them are Yeah, a lot of them are like decals, but there are some big tech ones like that, like the object source lighting, where you have a fireball that's glowing and you see that glow kind of reflected on your face. And that's something we're actively working on right now, and I cannot wait to release that because that brings so much kind of personality to a figure. So that was going to be one of my answers. Like that object source lighting is such a cool feature, and it's one that we've again known for a long time that we wanted to add, but knew that it was also like a big endeavor to kind of fit that into our system. And now we have an excuse. We got the support, and we got the people saying, yes, do that. So we're definitely chasing that. As far as print tech goes, apart from printing, living tiny people, I think the, the next, it'll probably just be a march. I don't think it's like color where it's like one big last feature that we've been waiting for. I think from here on, it'll just be incremental improvements, a little bit more detailed, a little bit more durable, brighter colors, things like that. Are you a painter? Do you paint figures much?
I do, not very well, but hey, keep an eye out for that video. Should be coming out soon. Actually, we're doing a video on, can I use the color tools and like analyzing the layers to be a better painter.
That is definitely something that is great. And I think we kind of talked about that a little bit in the Kickstarter, but it's been neat to see people kind of reaffirm that. Like our goal wasn't to make painting obsolete. Our goal is to support painting and give options for people who can't, whether they have, mobility problems or for whatever reason. So anyway, as a painter, you probably know it's pretty hard to do like incredibly fine details like eyes, for instance. If you even tippy top tier professional painters, they can make eyes look plausible. But in my experience, they always end up just absolutely like wonky eyed, kind of goofy looking. So with the 3D printing in color, eyes are an interesting case. So they're so small, like the actual iris on the color mini is fraction of a millimeter, but we capture it. It can be a little indistinct, it can be a little fuzzy, but typically on a figure, the good odds you're going to be able to see the eyes pretty clearly. And as that technology improves, once we get to a place where you can 3D print with detail that exceeds hand-painted figures, I can't imagine anything more impressive than that. That's going to be wild. And then, of course, there's multi-material printers, printers that are going to be able to print in metal and plastic or something like that. Or, translucency is another thing that we're watching with great interest. So I can imagine that kind of stuff arriving and being really excited about that. But I think practically 3D printing can evolve in a lot of ways. There's also the march of progress for, the printer you have on your desk, something that's designed for a consumer. Like eventually full color at home is going to be feasible without, these refrigerator sized Mamaki printers. You're going to be able to go and pick up the equivalent of any cubic for like $200 and print a color mini at home too. And that's probably, 5-10 years away, probably more like 5, maybe less, who knows? And that's all super exciting for us for sure.
I mean, if you want to spend, what is it, like 45 grand on a printer that has to go in your garage, you could totally get a Mimaki full color to print one mini at a time on this giant. What about like posable figures?
I've seen people do that on some printers. Like I think one of the main limitations we bump up against in printing things that are really, really, really small is once you get too small, they're no longer durable and they can no longer capture the kind of detail that people would expect. So I think we're really lucky. I feel like minis are a good frontier before things get too small for most technologies, I think. And you can imagine like printing a tiny, tiny little like ball socket like you'd have on an action figure. When you get down to, that being a millimeter big, I think it's probably not sustainable, or at least not something you can expect to last very long.
Yeah.
But that'll probably change too. If there's one thing I've seen over the last 6 years is that 3D printing tech is moving really, really fast. And I think that's super exciting.
Last question. What is your favorite character you've ever played in a tabletop game?
Well, that's a good question. I always feel like it's just the one I played most recently. I'm going to make you answer first. What's your favorite character you've ever played?
Kashana the Quick.
That's fantastic. Well, through that, I've come up with mine. I'm going to show you. This is Varian Black Willow. So this dude is from a game that we, us Sky Castlers occasionally play D&D games together, as you might imagine. And we played one a while back where I have never played an evil character before. I've always been drawn to to good guys. So Varian Black Willow was my first intentional, like, I'm going to play an evil character. And I really connected with him. He was great. He's kind of got a voice sort of like the Monarch from Venture Brothers. They're like, nah, a little bit Skeletor. But yeah, he was great. It was a great adventure.
We've recently been in a multiverse story arc that's kind of wrapping up with this season, and so we all had to play alternate versions of our characters, and I had so many characters in play that it was just like, all right, who am I playing in the alternate world? And the DM had me playing my half-orc artificer. But like, this is an alternate world where basically everything has gone wrong. The characters aren't necessarily evil, except mine definitely is. So there's something a lot of fun about playing evil.
Fantastic. But you got to be like mustache twirling evil, right? You got to be evil that doesn't make your party suffer for it. You've got to be kind of like a goofball.
I guess, okay, last question. Is Chibify ever coming back?
Sure. That's a good question. Probably. We are all hands on deck, incredibly focused on wrapping up Hero Forge stretch goals. Like, before we can consider anything else significant, that's really where we're putting as much of our attention as we can. But we do love Chibify. I mean, it's fun to build, and you can still build characters. Just can't order them. I do hope it comes back someday. I don't have any official timeline for you, though.
Fair enough. Well, I think that's all the time that we have. I've already taken more of your time than I got you to commit to. So
my pleasure.
I will let you go. And yes, if there's any other big things that are coming up, I will be happy to do another interview or video. We can do a live interview. We can do a video. Anytime you want.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Well, it's been a pleasure being here, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and ask your questions. I'm always excited to talk about 3D printing and minis with anyone who will listen.
No, absolutely.
And I'll tell your audience, come visit Hero Forge every Tuesday. We do new content. Something new comes out every single week, so definitely drop by and find what's fresh this week.
And hey, if you ever want to play, we always like to have guest stars come through.
That's fantastic.
That was fun.
I might take you up on that.
Anytime. Always welcome. So aside from having all of my weird, nerdy questions answered, my biggest takeaway from that was that Hero Forge is kind of a really cool company. I mean, Joshua talked in there about how like they support small artists and independent 3D printers printing off their files and making a business out of it. And that's cool. Not a lot of companies are like that. A lot of companies would be like, no, we'd prefer you buy it from us, but they're fine either way. So if somehow you haven't checked out Hero Forge yet, click on the link down in the description and at least go play around with it and make yourself some fun characters, because it's just a whole lot of fun to screw around with. If you want proof of that, check out our playlist from the series that they sponsored, where they just paid us to play around with their website. If you want to see more videos like this or more videos about Hero Forge, or if you just want to watch us play D&D, you can make sure to click on the subscribe button. Make sure you like this video so that more people can see it, and check out some of our other playlists up here of, various things we do screwing around on this channel. Be sure to check us out at twitch.tv/mercs of for live play, as well as other stuff. And until you see me again, sign-offs are a gimmick, and who really needs them?